There comes a time in every Dark Souls challenge runner's life where they will take on a challenge run that is so hard, it tests the very nature of their being, their mental fortitude, their knowledge and skill. But then they'll probably also do a bow-only run. If you have a favorite challenge runner, chances are is that they've done a bow-only run. Why? Well, because of all the little caveats that make bow-only so much more complex than your average Dark Souls run. Bow-only requires you to invest precious souls into arrows just to be able to attack, which of course means that you have less souls overall for stat upgrades. They're more restrictive in comparison to magic and melee when it comes to elemental buffs, so your damage output is overall much lower in comparison to them. And to attack it all, you get the long animation of drawing your bow before firing, which of course means that the bow isn't really top tier when it comes to attack speed. The issue is that because there's so few bows in Dark Souls 1, there's a much smaller weapon pool for runners to dip into. This, as you can expect, means that there ends up being a rather distinct tier list for bows that runners will aim to utilize. So, me being me, I thought that maybe for my bow run of Dark Souls that I should avoid all that. And that's what inspired this run, lads and ladies. I'm going to beat Dark Souls with only the short bow. The bow that pretty much everyone would agree is the worst overall bow in Dark Souls 1. Why is it the worst bow in Dark Souls 1? Well, because it has the lowest damage potential, from what I can tell. That's really it. It's honestly not even that bad because it has a faster draw speed than many of the other bows, so doesn't that kind of make up for its low damage? I don't know, I'm just basing this on shit I saw on Reddit, so give me a break. There were no set rules for this run, I just had a basic goal, and that was to defeat the game with just the short bow, so to do that, I can use whatever else I want. Any buffs or arrows, none of it is off limits. Let's begin. Obviously, I choose the Hunter class, since not only is it the only class that starts with a bow, the bow that it starts with is the only one I'm allowed to use. See? This run's already off to a good start. For the Asylum, it's more or less a straightforward run-through. Avoid the Asylum demon, circle around the cell block, let Oscar die instead of feeding him the electric soup, and collect my weapons outside of the fog door. When it comes to the real Asylum demon fight, I tried to snipe him from the balcony because I genuinely wasn't sure if Dark Souls has a high ground bonus. It doesn't, but here's the meme anyway.
I have the high ground!
Thankfully, the Asylum demon is almost no threat with the bow. I do only get 30 arrows to play with, so if I die more than once, I need to restart the whole game, but even at the measly 52 damage I was doing, it only takes about half of them to send the demon packing. Before we go any further, I just want to bring up this little stat right here. Shot range. Shot range works exactly as you think it would. It's a stat that determines how accurate you are over longer distances, and of course forces you to make minor adjustments to hit longer range shots. Now you may not think this is a big deal, and truthfully, it really isn't. But because of how goddamn terrible I am at aiming with a controller, I probably wasted about 500 arrows, and by extension the souls I used to buy them, in this run because of it. So fuck you, shot range! Anyways, with enough souls to grant myself a few levels, I immediately start boosting dexterity. The short bow has a D scaling in strength and an A in dexterity, the latter reaching S at +5. So, with a little help from Mugen Monkey, I determined that the best stats for this build would be 27 strength and 40 dexterity, so that's what I'll be aiming for here. After that, most of my souls will be spent on vitality and the various arrows. I pick up the first Firekeeper soul, head into the Valley of the Drakes, nab myself some soul items, the Grass Crest Shield and the Red Tearstone Ring, and make my way up through Darkroot. Using these items, I'm able to upgrade my bow to +3 at Andre's Anvil. Then I spend a little more time farming hollows to fill my quiver. Take note of the fact that despite increasing my dexterity several points and upgrading my bow, I somehow do less damage to an armored hollow than to the Asylum demon. Something ain't right there. Before taking on the first major boss of the run, I wanted to bolster myself just a little bit more than I already had, so I took to Darkroot Garden and headed towards the Moonlight Butterfly. I pick up the Elite Knight set for its magic defense, only to find out later on that the Hunter set I already had has nearly a 5th more magic defense overall, because of course it does. I wish I knew that beforehand because my biggest issue with the Moonlight Butterfly is my inability to avoid certain attacks, which would have been much easier if I was wearing the Hunter gear. I just have to make things hard on myself, don't I? Anyways, The benefit of having a bow in this fight is that I don't need to worry about waiting for the butterfly to descend in order to attack it. I can just spam a volley of arrows at it constantly, which basically cuts the fight in half. Damage is, for lack of a better word, fucking embarrassing, but the butterfly moves slow enough that there's very few missed shots. When the butterfly does take perch, I have to switch to manual aim to actually hit it, and while this may seem like an inconvenience, it really isn't. It allows me to keep enough distance that its AoE attack poses zero threat. All in all, a bow is probably the best way to fight the butterfly, despite the damage being insulting. With the souls gained from the butterfly, and a few from various soul items I found lying about, I upgrade the bow to +5 and spend the rest on an unnecessary amount of standard arrows. Hopefully that'll keep me going for a while. I grab the second Firekeeper soul, use the bow to snipe the channeler from below, I boost my vitality to 14 and dexterity to 17, and head to Undead Burg. Here, I pick up the rubbish to trade to Snuggly for a chunk later on, and then head in to take out the Taurus demon. Even though I didn't need to, I got myself into RTSR range to max out my damage and shorten the fight, which in hindsight was very silly, considering how long it actually took to get into RTSR range the way that I did it. As for the fight itself, well, it's a cakewalk. I managed to get off several arrows before the demon's health bar even appears, which puts the Taurus beneath half health before it's even able to strike back. A quick retreat on my part and a few more arrows, as well as an unexpected stagger, and the Taurus demon goes down. Using the Hellkite Dragon's Breath against the poor hollows on his bridge a few dozen times allows me to boost myself to 20 vitality and 25 dexterity, and more importantly, boost my confidence enough to finally take on the gargoyles. Like with the Taurus demon, I wanted to be in RTSR range, but this time for a slightly different reason. See, the hardest thing about multi-boss fights with the bow is the slow drawing time leaves me open not just to one enemy, but to two, which obviously doubles the risk and potential damage taken. So, my intention was to hopefully finish off the first one before the second one could even reach me. Makes sense, right? Too bad it didn't work out that way. Then, I also discovered another issue. See, the gargoyles are far quicker than any of the bosses I'd fought so far. So fast, in fact, that their animations will move them out of the flight path of my arrows pretty consistently. On top of that, compensating for the sloped roof is surprisingly hard to do unless I manually aim, otherwise my shots will just fly right overhead. This itself is a much bigger deal than you'd first think, because unless a gargoyle is on the exact same side as you, you'll miss at least a third of the time. This essentially cuts what is otherwise a decently sized arena in half. And I don't need to tell you that being locked in a box with two giant gargoyles is not an ideal situation. After a few attempts, I decide to drop the red tearstone ring, and of course, I immediately regret it. My damage dropped from around 170 to 87. The fuck? That's a little more than 50%, folks. So, I made a decision. I farmed more souls and bought a bunch of large arrows. Now, I suppose I should explain arrows in Dark Souls 1. See, there's 4 types of physical arrows in this game that you can choose from. The wooden arrows, which are the cheapest overall but do the lowest damage, the standard arrows, which are slightly better and slightly more expensive, the large arrows, which do the best damage but have a huge damage drop-off, and the feather arrows, which is kind of the middle of the road between standard and large, but has less damage drop-off over distance. Now, there's no real need to focus on one type of arrow, but I made the decision to only buy large arrows from this point on, mostly because there's no real need to buy the others. The only thing I'm losing out on is the damage drop-off, but I plan to pick up the Hawk Ring, so there's really no downside. Oh, and of course there's a few arrow types with auxiliary effects that I do use, but honestly, without elemental upgrades, they're really nothing special. Anyway, back to it. The large arrows add almost 40 points more worth of damage when using the red tearstone ring. That, mixed in with the fact that I'd figured out the proper distancing by now, meant that the fight finally turned in my favor. Little bit more dex and some more large arrows, and I head down to Blighttown. There's not much to get here apart from power within, which, as to be expected, I get without trouble. Otherwise, Queeleg is up next. I use the Poison Swamp to get myself into RTSR range, and immediately start unloading on the Spider Witch's body. That came out wrong. Surprisingly, Quelaag is one of the easiest bosses in this entire run. An arrow to her human chest is a guaranteed stun, and if you can get the rhythm down, you can stun lock her for the entire fight. But I, of course, do not have the skill for that. I believe it's because there is a slight delay after the end of her stun animation before you can stun her again, but I'm no expert. It's no biggie. I managed to do it enough that Quelaag doesn't even get a clean hit off. I ring the second bell. The ceaseless discharge gets to see me in my birthday suit, but to make sure that he doesn't tell anyone, I send him into an endless abyss. And with his souls, I boost some more vitality and endurance, as well as a soul point into attunement so I can equip power within later on. I head back to the asylum, pick up the peculiar doll, and also die a few times to the stray demon. But we don't need to talk about that. Off to the Capra demon. Now, I thought this fight was going to be much harder than it actually was. The constant threat of the bloodhounds made me believe that I'd have a near zero chance to even draw my bow, let alone loose an arrow, but surprisingly, it wasn't hard at all. I took to the Coward's Ledge right away, I survived an early barrage from the bloodhounds, and I got great RNG on the demon itself, with it almost never reaching the top of the stairs before striking at me, which threw it back to the ground and allowed me to pepper it with arrows until it died. I freed Laurentius, secured the Ligemba, and beelined it right to the Gaping Dragon. Now the damage here wasn't incredible, but it was pretty damn good. The long recovery on its belly flop attack leaves the dragon's weak spot open just long enough to get off 3 solid arrows, and that quickly adds up. Combine that with the Gaping Dragon's extremely slow movement, and I almost always have an opening. Another easy win. Some more vitality and dexterity, I talk to Laurentius for the Pyromancy Flame, and I upgrade my bow once more to take on Sen's Fortress. Now, based on what a bunch of people have commented about the Golem, it's not actually poise that causes him to stumble, but doing about 400 total damage to his leg. The issue with that is that locking on with the bow focuses on his chest, not his leg. So if I want to knock the Clanker, I need to free aim the entire fight. And despite what you may think, that's actually not that big of an issue. Despite the fact, of course, that I was only hitting him for about 64 damage with Power Within activated. I stagger him pretty quickly, all things considered, and then it's just a matter of hitting about a couple hundred damage to knock him. But, me being me, I managed to screw it up somehow, and instead of sending the Iron Golem tumbling over like a drunk guy on the sidewalk at 3 AM, he instead falls back on his ass like a drunk guy who just got home at 4 AM. This allows me to get off a whole mess of arrows before he gets up again. Then, it's right back to the legs. And he gets stunned again. And once again, he falls to his ass, not off the ledge. So yeah, I spent about 5 straight minutes killing the Golem the normal way with arrows. Only me. I hit 35 decks, very awkwardly tried to deal with the painting guardians on the rafters, and make my way through to Priscilla. As to be expected, the issue with this fight is her invisibility. I have to free aim the entire time. But this, thankfully, is made much easier since every arrow I stick her with stays in her body, giving me not only a visual cue to where she is in the arena, but a pretty recognizable target to aim at. Priscilla does have a weakness to fire, so that made me think that the fire arrows I picked up earlier from the female undead merchant in the aqueduct would be a benefit. But no, not really. I actually do slightly more damage with my large arrows than with the fire ones. Now obviously this would be higher if I infuse the bow, but I'm very lazy. After her cloak is dispelled, I can become just a tiny bit more focused. Focus on turning her face into a pincushion, that is. She goes down on my first attempt. I'm almost to the deck soft cap. I can taste it. Before taking on the Terrible 2, the giant blacksmith helps me get my bow to +10, and more importantly, I sneak into the crevice behind his old butt cheeks to get the hawk ring, a delightful little thing that increases the range of my arrows by a pretty significant amount. Once again, fuck you, short range! Ornstein and Smo turned out to be way easier than you'd think. I had assumed this was when my damage would really start to drop off, but surprisingly, I was hitting normal Smo for about 175 damage, which honestly was way more than I thought I'd be getting. I wasn't even using Power Within. And that's some shit. Now the biggest issue with the first phase of the fight is Ornstein's leaping stab attack. It proved to be way more of a nuisance than I'd like. It's one of those attacks that really define the fight. See, even if I'm aiming to wear down Smo, Ornstein is where you have to keep your focus. If I even think about attacking at the wrong time, Ornstein will be all over me like snow on cake. I still managed to break the fat man down, but then it got hard. Super Ornstein has so much more range in the second phase that I had to be far more strategic with my shots, otherwise he'd just bowl right into me. Pair that with the fact that my arrows were now doing a little more than half of what they were doing to Smo, and I finally found myself facing a challenge. Until, like all people who are getting their ass handed to them in a 2v1, Ornstein got salty and started spamming lightning bolts at me from across the room. He has dogshit aim, so just by hiding near one of the ruined pillars, I could unleash a snipe at him while his lightning feebly dissipated against the stone. He too goes down. Now, the reason why I killed Ornstein last is that he drops the Leo ring, which gives a damage boost to specifically thrusting counterattacks. And what are arrows considered, folks? Well, apparently that, because it works for them too. I also hit the dex cap. Hurrah! Here you go, degenerates. Don't say I never do anything for you.
Nom, 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 nom.
Back at the asylum, I give Snuggly the rubbish I picked up earlier for a Titanite chunk, and I pay the Stray Demon a visit. The reason why the Stray Demon is so dangerous to me is simply because I'm always unable to figure out just where his blood farts end. But with the bow, it's basically no trouble to attack him over and over again with no risk to myself. If he does get in close, I have more than enough time to run around him and put a few arrows up his butt. Easiest Stray Demon fight I've ever had. I head into Darkroot to put Sif down. Again, my damage is still way better than I think it should be. I keep thinking it's about to have a massive drop-off, but no. The best way to punish Sif is right after she does what I like to call the Poochie Pop Shove It, where Sif flies away and then sprints in again. It's basically a guaranteed hit with the bow, and with how consistent it is, Sif is very quickly put to rest. Little more strength, and then it's down to the demon ruins to damn my first Lord Soul. Pro tip, shooting an arrow over here can lure the Taurus demon off the edge, meaning you don't need to fight him. It isn't much, but hey, I offer very little in the way of actual game knowledge, so take it when it comes. Demon Fire Sage, like the Stray Demon, isn't anything special. Getting close when he swings his staff, get some distance when he does his farts. Either way, pepper his belly with arrows. Eventually, he'll learn his lesson. Despite almost dying to the centipede while getting through the lava fields, I managed to get off a bunch of quick arrows that take a sizable chunk from his health bar. There's quite a few missed shots since the centipede's windups can move it entirely out of the way of my attack, but it quickly becomes an arrow spam fest and I come out on top. The Bed of Chaos gets his ass cheese too, as I can pierce the blobs from afar without any reciprocation. Admittedly, it takes a little time to get the right shot, but hey, a little trouble is way better than a lot of trouble, am I right? First Lord Soul. Next, I went for Seath. There's no trouble heading through the archives, but of course, when we first meet, he curses me. Fuck you, Dark Souls. After lifting the curse, I head into the real Seath fight with the intention of trying to make the fire arrows work again. Part of me was determined to see if they could actually be of any... Really, Dark Souls? This is the first time I've ever seen two of the clams in Seath's fight at once. Has anyone else ever seen this? I didn't even know that that was possible. Thankfully, Seath hates seafood, so they aren't any issue. As for the betrayer himself, Seath moves so slow across his arena that I can endlessly loose a volley of arrows that chip away at his health. He barely even uses his crystal breath attack unless you're within a certain distance, so the bow basically disarms him of his best weapon. Again, one of the easiest Seath fights ever. With that boon of souls, I finally hit 27 strength, so from this point on, it's all vitality, folks. Oh, and arrows, of course. Pinwheel comes next, and the combination of a near fully upgraded bow and finished stats means that 6 arrows will send the Necromancer to the afterlife. And I also got the Mask of the Father, which I will wear, because why not?
We have such sights to show you.
Instead of heading to Nito, I instead ask Patches about having a rhinoplasty. He asks why. I pick up the Skull Lantern, and then I trade that to Snuggly for the Ring of Fog. And then I realized I hadn't killed Gwyndolin. Now, there's a pretty well-known strat where you can shoot him from the very entrance of his arena with poison arrows and let his life take away. But me being me, I found this way took way too long, which is ironic based on how I deal with a boss later on. So instead, I rush him and I die. But that's alright. I fight him the normal way, which is by far the most annoying way to do it. If I get in close enough to target him, he'll teleport away, so to be effective, I need to free aim each shot. As I said, this is very stupid and I shouldn't be doing it, but I'm awesome, so I make it work. Into the DLC, and I'll admit, I was a little hesitant. The DLC is usually where everything drops off significantly, and while my damage prior wasn't incredible, it had been way better overall than I thought. But, even without Power Within activated, a large arrow was hitting the Sanctuary Guardian for about 170 damage normally, and reaching nearly 300 if I hit a counterattack. There's a lot of missed arrows since the Guardian is a notoriously fast boss for this game, but there's a surprising amount of openings for counter hits that mean more than half of my attacks are on the high end damage-wise. I'm starting to think bows are kind of an easy mode. So what about Artorias? Well, this turned out to be more of what I expected. Less than 150 for a normal hit with Power Within, but a counter let me break 200. I died once simply because I misread his Guts flip, and then decided to test it without Power Within. And obviously, as you can expect, the damage dropped off significantly. But even so, knowing what attacks you can punish very quickly becomes a second nature, and Artorias, the Fabled Knight, goes down like a scrub. I'll admit that the damage drop-off did start to give me a little anxiety, so it was now time for something I usually don't do until the very end of the run. I finished upgrading the bow. Proud of that, I play Show You Mine and You'll Show Me Yours with Go. He wins, but he couldn't kill Calamite, so I decided to help finish the job for him. This turned out to be one of the trickier fights simply because of how much of the arena Calamite can cover with his attacks. And since I have to be within a certain distance for my attacks to be effective, too far and I can't properly target him, too close and I run the risk of being flattened while I draw an arrow, coupled with the fact that I was barely breaking 100 damage an arrow, and we finally had ourselves a real fight. What does help though is that several of Calamite's attacks leave him stationary for quite some time, so moving in as he winds up for them allows me to get off a few arrows as he recovers. It's not much damage overall, since I get no bonuses when I do it, but it is effective. Eventually, the slow descent into becoming a giant pincushion proves too much for old Calamite, and he gives in, granting me the victory, and more importantly, 1-up and go. Now, earlier, I mentioned the Gwyndolin cheese and how bored I was doing it. But for Manus, I decided to see if I could actually get his cheese to work because I'd never actually done it before. To do it, you need to have the Hawk Ring equipped and to position yourself in just the right spot on the edge of the abyss before his fog door. You can't target him, and the free aim doesn't actually allow you to go that low, so there's a lot of trial and error when it comes to finding my range. And when I do manage to get it down, I find out that each large arrow does less than 10 damage. Ain't that swell? Maybe I should have bought feather arrows. Either way, I felt that this would take overall less time than fighting him regularly and dying half a dozen times, so I kept at it. And eventually Manus died. After 12.5 minutes. 12.5. But the DLC was done, so it was back to Lordran, where I needed to pick up just one more item in Sen's fortress. The Slumbering Dragon Crest Ring. This prevents me from making any sound at all, which is just what I need for the next boss, Nito. Pairing said ring with the Ring of Fog meant that none of Nito's hooligans will actually attack me during the fight, leaving Nito and myself to fight one-on-one. I get the early advantage, as there is so much distance between us at the beginning of the fight that I can just unleash a volley of arrows at him as he lumbers towards me. I manage to stack 2,000 damage before Nito even gets to swing his sword. When he does, it's just a matter of getting some distance again and going ham. Easiest Nito fight you will ever see, I'm starting to think bow runs are very, very easy. And then the Four Kings turned out to not only be the hardest fight in the run, but the Four Kings turned out to be one of the most frustrating series of attempts out of any boss I've ever attempted in a run. Now, my damage wasn't atrocious, especially compared to the last few DLC bosses, but what is atrocious is that my overall DPS is just not enough to secure a kill on a king before the second would spawn. Meaning that I would quickly find myself at the mercy of 2 or even 3 kings before I even had the first one vanquished. And since I really need my distance to build damage, the kings would respond in kind with one of their many magic attacks or wide sword swings. There's multiple times where I would find myself just sprinting away from one of their blades of ghostly bullshit that would just mercilessly hunt me until I got hit. It's a proverbial clusterfuck. I tried fire arrows, they still suck. I tried power within, just doesn't help. And on my best attempt, my bow began to break, cutting my damage drastically. It's an absolute disaster of a fight, probably the worst Four Kings fight I have ever done. I got so pissed off that I even tried moonlight arrows even though the kings are resistant to magic. Eventually, I just quit trying to keep my distance at all. I decided to tank the sword strikes as much as possible and keep piling on the arrows. And for God knows what reason, this worked. Killing the first king before the second spawned, killing the second just as the third spawned, and killing the third just as the fourth spawned. The fifth spawned as well, but thankfully, he just lay back and let me do my thing. Maybe he was being merciful, I don't know. But that of course meant that there was only one thing left to do. I offered the Lord Souls, and I headed into Gwyn. Now, despite them never really showing up for me, I actually tried the fire arrows once more, since Gwyn is weak to the element. But of course, I immediately switched to large arrows again. Again, maybe I should have infused the weapon, I don't know. Without parrying, I found that the best time to attack is right off of his grab, which counts as a counter and gives me a sizable chunk of bonus damage thanks to the Leo ring. I take a lot of hits, and since Gwyn can cover most of his arena in the time it takes me to even draw an arrow, I spend much of the fight on my back foot. But, like you'd expect, I slowly whittle down the Lord of Cinder, and he falls at my feet. So, that's that. Dark Souls with only the short bow. I'm gonna be honest, this was by far one of the easier challenge runs I've ever done, or probably will ever do. Bows do have low damage output overall in comparison to the other weapon classes, yes, but I don't know how anyone can say that the challenge of many bosses is greatly diminished by the fact that you can just hit them from so far away. Manus, for example, is completely devoid of a challenge when I can just kill him from outside of his arena. In fact, after looking back on the run, I think most of the challenge came from me personally trying to make things too complex for myself. All you really need is a bow, some arrows, and the right stats, and you're set. Oh well, it was still fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what to do next. Till then, bye bye.